We seem to have hit 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to the latest Duke media briefing on the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on society. I'm Gregory Phillips with Duke Communications. I'm here to moderate. We have three Duke psychologists with us today to discuss the effects of isolation and some of the best ways to cope with that. I'll introduce them in turn, get the discussion going, and then we'll open it up to questions. We are recording this briefing and we'll make that recording available to the media afterward upon request. Everybody except the speakers is currently on mute. Please stay that way until we get to questions and then we'll unmute everybody. Okay, so with us today we have Terrie Moffitt. Terrie is a professor of psychology and her studies include how lifelong mental and behavioural disorders affect the ageing process. And she's also involved in two longitudinal studies that have followed participants from birth to adulthood. Terrie, good morning.
Morning.
Tim Strauman is a professor of psychology and neuroscience. He studies how self-regulation affects vulnerability to depression and other disorders, plus the impact of treatments for depression. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning.
And Yan Li is a psychologist and director of counselling and psychological services at Duke Kunshan University in China, for which she managed counselling and support services for 600 plus undergraduates after that campus went into lockdown in January. Good morning, Yan Li.
Hey, morning.
And I'd love to start with you. The Duke Kunshan campus has already spent more than 2 months locked down. Can you tell us how you went about helping that community manage the stress that comes along with isolation?
Yeah. So we, I remember very clearly that we found out about the news at the end of January, a couple days before Chinese New Year. And then we're in the midst of transition. Students were leaving campus, getting ready to go home or travel abroad for international students, not going back to their home country. Most of them just travel. So, and then we had to really immediately to respond and to really help our students to get ready for the transition. So as counseling center, and right away that I thought about to really send out messages to students that we care. It is scary and hard and absolutely normal to struggle emotionally. And also we want the student to know that they are not alone and we're here to help them and we'll get through this together. So, so throughout the time, and then we try to be kind of really consistently to invade messages such as like we were proactive and being prevention and also promotion and present and persistent with our messages. And so we right away and within one day, we send out a newsletter to all of our students in both English and Chinese and to convey that message. And then establish the routine of sending weekly newsletters, sometime at the beginning, 2 or 3 newsletters in a week, to really helping students to maintain a sense of calm and peace and during this chaotic time. So we provided and still providing online individual counseling sessions and groups and doing all sorts of online workshops. And we also hired a part-time therapist, bilingual therapist for our faculty and staff. And that was not part of our work in the past. And we really use our CAPS student workers as our ears and eyes to reach out to their peers, and then also provide a lot of mentorship and guidance on student-led mental health activities and outreach programs to really have the student to be able to connect with each other. So we had 2 really successful student-led outreach program among, in CAPS. One is DKU Peer for You. It's a mentor, peer mentor mental health support group led by students. And we had just last week, we had 40 plus students registered as volunteer respondent to provide peer support, and we had training, and then we also had DKU challenge and to really engage their different well-beings, different aspects of their well-being, and also led by students. We have really successful participation, virtual participation. Students are just really creative. And also in the meantime, we launched 2 online programs available for all DKU community, not just the student, but also faculty and staff. And so One is the online interactive self-help therapy. So people can go in with DKU ID, they can go in and then really can engage self-help interactive therapy. And then another one is the 24/7 online mental health screening. And so that people can access to their really reliable mental health screening, and then we'll give them recommendation if the score are elevated, and then to seek professional help. And in the meantime, that we really try to strengthen the close collaboration with academic departments, and of course, continuous sharing our clinical observations about students' struggle and advocacy for students if needed, and also provides resources for faculty and staff on how to support students with their mental health concerns, and also collaborate with academic departments on providing webinars and workshops to really, as a combined force, to really make sure that we are all together to support our students in this hectic, very challenging time.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you so much for that. Professor Strauman, Yan Li talked about the struggle here, and your work has focused on how people can be at risk for depression or anxiety when they feel they're unable to meet their goals or be the kind of person they want to be. So under these circumstances where so many people's lives have been interrupted, what's most important to remember about how to cope with this current reality?
Yes, so one way to think about how COVID can affect people psychologically is we all have roles that are very important to us that we try to fill every day. You know, there are people in our lives that matter to us. There are accomplishments that we're trying to pursue. There are obligations and responsibilities that are very important to us. And normally, you know, we sort of face challenges anyway under the best of circumstances. When something unexpected like this comes along, you know, you can sort of think of it as a role transition. But unlike something like getting married or retiring from a job where you have plenty of time to plan how you're going to do things, you know, all of us are now in a situation where suddenly our daily routines, how we take care of ourselves, how we take care of other people, how we succeed in our jobs, how we you know, make sure that our obligations and responsibilities are taken care of. All of that is thrown into disarray. And so part of the problem of the isolation is that it's very easy for people to start thinking, you know, I'm not being the person I need to be. I'm not living up to my own goals and standards. And so a lot of the work that we've done in terms of identifying why people are at risk for depression and then what to actually do about it to remove the depression, alleviate it, or prevent it, is to develop ways to get people to think about, okay, what really is most important to me? What is still under my control under these circumstances? I may not be able to, you know, go to the office every day. I may have been now put into situations or circumstances where my work is interrupted, or, you know, I can't see the people I love. I can't, you know, drive across town to take care of my elderly mother. So it's very easy for people to feel like I'm failing. I'm not living up. I'm not being the person I want to be. I'm letting other people down. That kind of thinking, in combination with this isolation and this incredible disruption that we're all living through, really does render people vulnerable to being unhappy, being distressed, feeling guilty, feeling anxious. And so the message that I'd like to be able to get across today, and I'm happy to talk about it in more detail, is that it's very important to stop, identify what are the things that are most important, what are the things that are and are not under your control right at this moment, and are there novel ways or different ways or approximations that allow you to still be the person that you want to be, still take care of the people that you love, and ride out this crisis until you can get back to the roles that are more familiar, but not to let the isolation and the interruption change or influence whether you think as a person you're meeting your own goals and obligations. That's a real setup for depression and anxiety and other kinds of problems.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I definitely think we're going to want to delve more deeply into that. But I'd like to move on to you, Professor Moffitt, because despite all the anxiety and that the pandemic's causing, you found that people can actually take comfort from knowing everyone else's experience is also experiencing isolation, and that this shared experience can actually benefit society. So how does that work, and what are those potential benefits?
Thank you, Greg. Right now, I've been following a lot of focus on the internet, warning us about how social isolation is going to harm our mental health. And what I thought I could do today is provide a counterpoint to that warning. Some psychologists are comparing the attack of the coronavirus to the bombing attacks on London during World War II. And the Blitz and the COVID-19 are both scary and isolating. People have to stay home while being reminded constantly about uncontrollable death, and it's dragging on for weeks and weeks. But the other thing that the London Blitz and the COVID-19 experience have in common is fostering a sense of solidarity among us. So everyone is in this together. There's quite a bit of historical evidence that this kind of shared ordeal can be good for a society. It can slow down our lives, create a sense of shared purpose, and provide opportunities to practice helping others. All these things are good for our mental health. So in 1939, in Britain, ahead of the Blitz, Winston Churchill consulted psychologists, and he was told by mental health experts, the air raids and bombings by Germany are going to cause such terror that millions will go insane. The psychiatric hospitals will be overwhelmed with patients. So that turned out not to be true then, and it's not true now. Now, my research team has published a lot of research on social isolation and loneliness among teenagers and young adults. But very little of the research done up until now by us and others is actually relevant to the COVID-19 situation, because in all the research, the person who is lonely is surrounded by an ocean of other people who are popular and fully engaged with other people all day in day-to-day life. So the isolation that we're experiencing now as a country is different. Now, what researchers who study social isolation do agree about can be helpful to think about. This is the fact that social isolation and loneliness are very different things. So social isolation is simply a physical state of having to be in a place by yourself with nobody else there. Loneliness is different. It's a state of mind. It's possible to feel lonely in a room full of people. It's possible to feel lonely at your own birthday party. So in fact, our research has followed the same young people for 2 decades now, and those who reported that they felt lonely and depressed in high school also felt lonely and depressed after they left their parents' home and went away to college. And they still say that they feel lonely now that they've graduated and are out working. So lonely can be a state of mind, and some people carry it with them to new situations. The reverse is also true. Many people who experience social isolation don't ever feel lonely. So one thing our research has shown is that the correlation between loneliness and social isolation is actually quite small, quite low. So it's important, I think, for the public to understand that social isolation doesn't automatically mean that you will be lonely, depressed, and anxious along with it. Now, to prepare for this interview, I looked up some books written by people who've endured serious, protracted social isolation. A prison inmate who wrote about solitary confinement, a modern-day hermit who lived in the woods in Maine for years without speaking to another person, an astronaut who lived alone on the International Space Station for 6 weeks, and my great-uncle I talked to, who was a prisoner of war in Korea. And I noticed that their experiences had several things in common, but one thing stands out. They worked to bring human experience into their isolation. So they read books in order to interact with other people who were characters in stories, or if they were denied access to books, they harnessed their memories of social occasions when they remembered being happy with friends and loved ones. So the human imagination is a very powerful tool that we have. And the good news is most of us don't even have to rely on our imaginations to create contact with other humans, because we have the internet and the telephone. So we're all undergoing social isolation now, but we're not alone in this, and that makes all the difference. It can be helpful to know that isolation doesn't automatically lead us into being lonely and depressed and anxious. That can depend on our vulnerability before the COVID-19 began. And in fact, we can pretty much expect to remain ourselves, or there's a chance that we may become even better in some ways if we embrace the experience of solidarity. Thanks.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. Thank you. This is great. Three very, very different and very useful perspectives there. I have a ton of questions myself, but at this point, I'd like to open it up to everybody else that's on the call. So I believe Ivan is going to unmute everyone. And so if anybody has a question, please let us know who you are and the outlet you're calling from, and ask away.
Hey everyone, this is Sarah Kruger with WRAL, and one thing I wanted to ask is, sorry, are multiple people talking?
Today was one of those.
Okay, just want to make sure you all can hear me. So I think hopefully during this time it's normal to feel some sense of sadness or anxiety at times. At what point does someone know that they need medical attention, that they need professional help?
I can answer this question. So if you or your loved ones or people that you work with or students and have persistent, so that's the key word, persistent sadness, anxiety, anger, or hopelessness, all the really vulnerable emotions, and also lost interest in pleasurable activities and feeling being overwhelmed. And that's one of the criteria.
Recording off.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, and also another criteria is significant impairments or change in function, such as if you can't sleep, or sleep is disrupted and can't get out of bed and lose appetite, concentration, or is not able to attend your hygiene and daily hygiene. And also there's some kind of, if you notice, there's some kind of impulsive reckless or risky behaviors, such as substance abuse or self-injury. And of course, also thoughts or expression about death, dying, or suicide. All those are signs to, this is the time to seek professional help and support.
Okay, fantastic. Would either of our other panelists like to chime in and add anything to that?
I do think that those are the key signs. That's wonderful to have them listed out and be reminded of them. There are also, I understand, places online where it's possible to go and type in your symptoms, and it will tell you how unusual that is and whether it's approaching a risk zone where you could seek help. On the other hand, the main indicator, just for yourself subjectively, is your level of distress. So if you're unhappy with your situation, reach out to somebody else. It doesn't have to be a psychiatrist. It doesn't have to be a mental health professional, but let other people know so that you're not distressed all by yourself. Reach out and tell family members, tell friends. Don't worry about the stigma for mental health issues. This is not the time for that. It's part of that solidarity. We're all going through it together. Everybody understands.
Gotcha, fantastic. And before we move on, Professor Strown, I'd like to ask you, you touched upon thinking about things you can control, in these situations. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about that, in the sense that I know that everybody's familiar right now with occasional feelings of dread, or despair that could wash over you. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about ways you can stop yourself in that situation, ways to remind yourself to focus on the things that you can control. Is there anything you can add to that?
Sure. So one way to think about it is if you're not feeling unsettled and worried and sort of projecting into the future right now, then I don't want to be trite about it, then you're not paying attention to what's actually happening. I mean, this is a momentous change in our lives that none of us anticipated. It's totally involuntary. It's taken us by surprise. Speaking for myself, I would never have guessed I was going to be in these kinds of circumstances. So if you're not feeling distressed, then to me, I'd be sort of wondering whether maybe you're just not admitting that to yourself or not. The key here is to stay as connected as possible to the things and the people that are most important to you. As Dr. Moffitt said, you know, we have access, we have phones, we have internet. There are ways to stay connected to the kind of person that you're trying to be. It's an enormously powerful emotional side of ourselves. You know, we grow up knowing that it's very important to our parents that we become a particular kind of person. It's very important to our families. It's very important to ourselves. And those are things that are always there in the background. You know, whether you're having a good day or a bad day. A lot of the reactions that we have to sort of, you know, just everyday experiences of conversations and interactions is due in part to what's the implication for, you know, am I being the kind of person that I really want to be? So part of what we try to encourage people to do is to, first of all, understand that the emotional reactions are understandable, they're normal, they're a useful signal as long as they're not overwhelming, like Dr. Lee was describing. And then try to use that as an opportunity to stop and say, okay, what can I still do here that will be meaningful, that will be helpful to someone else? Even if it's just connect, make a phone call, send an email. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but the social contact will go a long way. The sense of solidarity, that this is a shared burden, it's not an individual failure. Those, I think, are the kinds of things that can help protect people from getting sucked down into the vortex of more and more distress and leading to where it really requires the intervention of a mental health professional.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Okay, we're going to open it up again to questions. Now, we ended up with a lot of noise when we unmuted everybody, so I'm going to let you unmute yourselves. If you're just using the Zoom app, you know, you can tap the screen and unmute yourself in the bottom left corner. If you are calling in from a regular cell phone, you can use *6 to unmute yourself. So I'm going to hush for a second and see if there are any more questions out there. I'll give people a moment to unmute themselves.
All right, well, Sarah Kruger with WRAL has another question, so I will jump in. So we are hearing a lot recently that this week is expected to be just kind of the worst week as far as deaths and all of that goes. Do you all have any advice for the average person at home who, you know, maybe doesn't need professional help but is still feeling overwhelmed, and how you would cope with this?
I can try to answer this question. And so I really agree with both Dr. Strawman and also Dr. Moffitt, yes. And so what they have talked about in terms of really turning into this lotus control, internal lotus control, and turning into your value, and also knowing that this is a moment of solidarity, and also we're not alone and we're all in this together. So first, in terms of full control, and really focus on what kind of things that you can control in this moment. So it's important to actually turning off the news and have very limited exposure to news and social media. And this will help you to not feeling flooded or overwhelmed. And remember, social distancing is not social connection. And so stay connected with people. And this is something we can control. And also to really to practice compassion, self-compassion, kindness, and graceness, and also maintain a positive and hopeful attitude. I know it's really hard to do that right now, but also finding things, fun things to do at home. And earlier, Dr. Stroman talked about how to write out these the wave of for this challenging moment. Actually, I wrote a newsletter for our student and used the acronym RIDE, to really help the students and our community to ride out this wave. So the acronym is, the R is recognize. So it is important to recognize what you're feeling and thinking. So really turning mindfulness is a vehicle to connect our internal experience and the present moment. So you can use a very simple technique and skill base and say it's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 census. So increase your awareness and ground yourself in the present moment. List 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you feel, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. So those 5 senses can ground ourselves into the present moment. And you can also enter a gratitude journal and to write down things you're grateful. And that's also have a lot of scientific evidence and in terms of maintaining a sense of gratitude of what you have and what you control can also help with our mental health. And insight, the second letter I is insight. So develop insight of our difficult feelings. So again, don't judge yourself for feeling the way you are. And then those vulnerable emotions, they're very normal for us, all of us to experience because we're human beings and we're in a life-threatening situation and literally. And so accept them and be compassionate. And also you can reserve a room. So we're all in home quarantine. So reserve a room or space, a corner of the room as a breathing space. So in this space, you can, whenever that you feel overwhelmed and sad and lonely and in the sense of despair, and you can practice mindfulness breathing for 10 or 15 minutes until you feel grounded. And D is diffusion. Diffusion means we try to neutralize our relationship with our thoughts. We are going to have a lot of scary thoughts, a lot of worry thoughts, and also images and probably past memories. And then to realize that, oh, I noticed this is interesting thoughts. Thank you, worry mind. And to say it in a silly voice and write it down. So all those skills that we can use to neutralize our relationship with our thoughts. So we're putting them in the context and you can see them clearly, not being kind of hooked by them. And the last one is engage. Like Dr. Dr. Tim, this is our first time meeting. So trying to remember your last name, Strauter, Tim, what Tim has said earlier in terms of values, right? So it's really important to really ground us with our values and find a way, even tiny step to engage in them. Go for a walk if it is this condition allows you, and to engage in some yoga activity and do whatever that leads you towards your value, that engage in them. So those are the some tips that I can share. Thank you.
Splendid, thank you. Terrie, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, and Tim, you also did, about the internet, and of course that can be a very valuable tool for connecting, but it can also be dangerous because we go down a whirlpool of negative news reports. I'm wondering if you can share any practical tips for how we kind of regulate our use and channel it towards the things that are going to nourish us rather than things that will drain us.
What I've been doing is really following Dr. Lee's advice with the RIDE list, although I didn't know that that's what we called it, but it's a great list. And I like especially last item, which is to engage, but I've been deliberately engaging with things that are beautiful. I've been using the internet to take virtual walks around all the museums of the world. So if you go to the Google Museum site, Google Street View has visited all the museums. So you can go to very beautiful places. I've been using the internet to look up poems. I've been, just deliberately engaging with positive material. I limit the exposure to the news about COVID-19 to 1/2 hour, the 5:30 news, and that's it. So not really having it on all day. Whatever you need to hear, you'll find out at 5:30, and you can turn it off at 6.
If I could follow up on that, in a lot of the work that we've done with people in both normal and sort of extraordinary circumstances, we've developed a little sort of rubric or ritual that I think might be helpful. So at any moment, if you're trying to sort of figure out what are my goals, what am I trying to accomplish here, what's happening, you can either be trying to make something good happen, or you can trying to be keeping something bad from happening. One of the difficulties of the situation that we're in right now is that there are some potential bad things that there isn't a lot we can really do about. You know, we're protecting ourselves, we're isolating, we're keeping social distance. And so what we would be telling people that we were working with in therapy or in a preventive intervention is, you know, make a list of what are the bad things I am trying to keep from happening to me, to the people I love, and what have I already done? Is there anything else in the realm of possibility that I could actually do? And if the answer is no, I've done the things that I can already do, then we would encourage people, and this is following what Dr. Moffitt was saying, to switch over to, okay, now I'm going to focus on how can I make something good happen for myself or for other people. One of the things that we know behaviorally and also at the level of the brain is you can't really be in both states at the same time. It's your body is not sort of oriented to either being protective or being nurturant, you know, either trying to make good things happen or trying to keep bad things from happening. And one of the ways we help people reduce anxiety and reduce worry is to say, okay, I've gone through the checklist, I've done what I can do, I've watched the news, I have the information I need. Now I'm going to intentionally turn to, I have to do things to nurture myself. I have to do things that are rewarding. I have to do things that bring joy to myself and other people. Now, Dr. Lee said, you know, if you find that you're unable to do that, then that's where you might want to start thinking about making contact with a professional. But I think for most of us, if we make that very intentional, allowing ourselves to put aside, we've done what we can do to protect ourselves and the people we love. Now we have this other thing that we also need to do for ourselves to sustain ourselves. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. And I think, you know, what we would be encouraging people to do is to find easy, inexpensive, creative ways to do that, even if it's just a virtual walk through a beautiful place.
Fantastic, thank you. Sarah, I hope you feel like you got some useful answers there to your question. And now I'm going to open it up again, see if we have other questions. Again, if you're on a regular cell phone, you can use *6 to unmute yourself, or if you're in the Zoom app, you can just tap the microphone, and I'll give people a few moments to unmute themselves and ask a question.
Hi, this is Anna from Business Insider. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yes.
Well, thank you for your advice so far. I have been hearing from a lot of people, mostly millennials, who are struggling kind of, especially around this week with Passover and Easter coming up, in generational arguments, if you will, where their parents and even grandparents don't really understand the gravity of this and want them to come home. And they're trying to do the right thing by keeping their distance. But it's adding another layer of mental health crisis in a way, where these people that they would usually reach out to for support are almost making them feel guilty for being bad children in a way. So I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that situation at all and what you'd recommend people do.
Anyone ready to jump in on that hot potato?
Well, I can certainly say that I resonate with that, being sort of, you know, in the generation where I have an elderly parent who I live very far away from and feel the need to be constantly connected to, and this nagging sense of whatever I do, it's not going to be enough to make sure she's fully protected. And then, of course, my own children, the students that I work with. It can be especially difficult for people who are at a critical sort of developmental point of, you know, you've moved out, you're trying to build an independent life, and suddenly here are these circumstances that are totally disruptive. You know, universities have just discharged students back to their homes. You know, people who were about to begin jobs or sort of new stages in their profession, suddenly it's all on hold, and that's clearly going to exacerbate any differences that were probably there to begin with. I'm not a relationship expert. I can only say that, for me, the most important thing is to keep going back to basics and try to be reassuring, try to say, I do love you, but it's not a smart thing for you and I to be in proximity. I promise you that as soon as this passes, we will rebuild and rejuvenate the relationship that we have. But, this is literally an extraordinary situation, a crisis. And one of the ways you show love to other people is to do what's right, to do what's best, even if there's something in their behavior that's making that difficult. And that's not an easy thing to do, but at least I think it can be helpful to people to remind themselves, why am I doing this? Why am I not just saying, well, the heck with it. I'm going to put all of these precautions aside. You're doing it because you really do love those people and care about them and want to protect them. You probably won't agree on the best strategies. You probably won't agree on everything, but it's possible to get through this by focusing on, everything I'm doing to care for myself, care for the people that I love, maintain the relationship, and know that this is temporary.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Straumann. Do either of our other panelists want to weigh in on that?
I can suggest something. I'm located in one of North Carolina's most rural counties towards the west, where people have not been taking the social distancing very seriously up until now, and I have been getting a lot of entreaties from friends and family members to get together, and so I have developed a technique of two things, and both of them involve education. First of all, I really explain to the person who wants to get together that the reason why I can't afford to get sick. I explain that these are the things I'm responsible for. I'm responsible for older parents. I myself am over the over 60 at-risk group. I really need to walk them through that, and then they get it. It's just that they didn't think about it. So giving a little education about my point of view about why I don't want to get sick with this virus has turned out to be really helpful. The other thing I do, which has to be handled delicately, but you can do, is to say, right, I'm being very hardcore about the social isolation to avoid any chance of getting the virus. How hardcore have you been being? And can you tell me where you've been this week? So usually the person says, oh, I've not been anywhere. And then they stop and think about it, and they think they've been to IKEA, they've been to the grocery store, they've been to Costco, they've been running around all over the place, all over town. And I say, I'm really sorry, but I can't afford to be around people unless they've been hardcore in their social distancing. So, and usually when that's handled, those 2 points are made, explain why I can't afford to be sick, and query, how hardcore have you been, then they get it. And it's fine. I haven't had anyone to become upset.
Okay, fantastic. And I hope that answered your question. We've also had a question here come over the chat, which I'm going to read out here and see if anybody would like to tackle. Question says, I'm hearing a lot of people describe vivid, nightmare-like dreams during this time. How do dreams connect to our emotional life, and why might we be having more intense dreams during this time? I'm not sure how that kind of relates to anybody's expertise here, but does anybody have anything to offer on that?
The physiology of dreaming suggests that we do more of it when we're exposed to more new information during the day, because what sleep and dreaming does is consolidate memories. So if you don't learn much of anything new during the day, no reason to have vivid dreams. But if you learn new information that you never knew before, that stimulates the dream cycle because of its laying down new memories and storing and encoding new memories. So there may be a simple physiological explanation for why people are having more dreams. The content of the dreams, I'm not sure. Maybe Dr. Lee would have some ideas about that. Have your students said this?
Yeah, our students haven't talked about in terms of dreams and nightmares about COVID-19. I think also probably there's some kind of generation differences, and their focus a lot is on school relationship. And but there are studies. We are our humanity. We're experiencing trauma. Really, this is what we're experiencing. So, and then when one of the trauma responses is dreams, and also what you're describing over here in terms of, vivid and nightmares and dreams in this time. And I'm not saying that this trauma that we're gonna all have PTSD, but also the way that we're gonna be able to is recognize the flood of information, the flood of traumatic changes in our life, right? The sense of out of control, and then not knowing and when this is going to end, how this is going to end. And also we have also talked about this is maybe going on for a couple years until we find a vaccine, right? All of those information is very scary. And so to have those kind of worry thoughts and feelings, and that can also it also depends on how much social media consumption that you're exposed to, and that those are all risk factors to for various trauma responses. And so kind of just to be able to recognize and that Terrie earlier talked about in terms of how sorry, I'm just losing my the connection of what I was going to say, but the all this is normal kind of a response, and but be able to intervene immediately and to be aware of those emotions and what weighing on you, and to respond in a way that to really be able to turn it into what you can control, and again turning off the news and finding fun things to do, positive attitude, and also attending those emotions, those vulnerable emotions and thoughts with mindfulness, with compassion, and also be able to diffuse your thoughts and
Gotcha.
engage meaningful and behaviors, actions.
Gotcha. Thank you. Professor Straumann, I wanted to ask you about something Dr. Lee just said. There's this mention of we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know how long we'll be in isolation and so on and so forth. What kind of extra risks does that present as it pertains to the potential for anxiety to turn into depression? And are there any things you can suggest for how people should cope with the uncertainty related?
Well, I think there are some tried and true techniques that the three of us have been talking about that will not make the uncertainty go away, but will allow us to stay focused on what we can and can't control. I really resonated with Dr. Moffitt's comparison of the London Blitz with what we're living through now. Totally uncontrollable, totally unpredictable, totally disruptive, and yet people made it through. Circumstances that I'm sure in historical terms were much more traumatic and much more physically dangerous. The uncertainty is always there. And one of the things that's sobering and disruptive about a crisis like this is that it's very easy for us to go about our daily lives and to not be constantly confronted with our own mortality, or, not be having to worry about, I have a loved one and what if they get sick and I don't even get a chance to see them. That's always true. It's always there in the background. It's been highlighted now. It's been brought to the front, which means we have to work harder to acknowledge that we can't control it, focus on, what can we do to protect people? And I really liked what Dr. Lee was saying about compassion and self-awareness and mindfulness. And I thought the way Dr. Moffitt described having a frank conversation with people, you know, I care about you, I love you, I don't want to see you doing that, and I can't risk either of us getting sick. There's a lot we can do each day that if we keep focusing on that and we can intensify in the connections that we have with people, that can help to balance the uncertainty. But we also are going to have to acknowledge, all of us, that the uncertainty is there. The fact is it's always there. Now we're sort of forced to look at it. And so, you know, we need to very intentionally try to compensate for that by connecting as tightly as we can to the people that we care about and controlling what it is that we can control. There's not going to be an answer that's going to make the uncertainty go away. It's normal to feel it, but we can try to compensate for it.
Okay, thank you so much for that. My internet convulsed and I was off the call there. I hope it didn't get weird or anything. But
Greg, I'm here. You're breaking up.
Yeah.
So we can't hear Greg right now. Hi, this is Allison Jones. Greg, apparently his internet has dropped out a bit. I was going to ask if there are any more questions from reporters at this point.
I have a topic that I'm not a reporter, but I have one that I think is on everyone's mind.
Great, let's hear it.
Who are the groups of people who we ought to be the most worried about right now? So I'm thinking of, there's some people who are stuck, isolated in very small places. You know, like I know someone who's living in a 400 square foot high-rise apartment with no balcony, and it's been shut in there for 2 months. There's some people who rely totally on their workplace for their social life, and now that they can't go there, they're really feeling adrift. There's some people that are isolated with an unpleasant person who's really raising their stress levels. And there are some people who are running out of money and don't have a job to go back to. So, you know, there are probably groups like this. I know there are young parents who are struggling to do their homeschooling with small children. So I think I'd be interested to hear if Tim Strauman or if Dr. Lee have special tips for people in those situations which make them particularly vulnerable. I mean, one thing is, if we know somebody like that, now's the time to reach out to them and tell them we care.
That's a great point. Dr. Strauman, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is, anytime we can focus on someone else's needs, it will take some of the pressure and distress off of us. Building that solidarity that Dr. Moffitt talked about, I think, is absolutely essential. You really don't have to look very far to see people who are in dire circumstances. And one of the best preventive measures in terms of suicide prevention, actually, is simply reaching out to somebody and say, you know, I'm here for you. Is there anything you need? I can, you know, I know you're in difficult circumstances. You know, parents of young children, students, and I'm sure it's true at most universities, but this is just, you know, a totally unpredictable transition, and they've just been sort of ripped away from where they like to be and where their supports are. You know, elderly people, people who are isolated, people who are living in circumstances that already had, you know, chronic relationship problems. It's very important for people to reach out and ask for help, ask for connection. And it's very important to look for opportunities just to say, you know, I'm not 100% sure how that person is coping. I'm just going to check in with them. The worst that can happen is I find out they're coping just fine. But maybe that connection will be enough to help defuse the situation, help people feel a little better. And anytime we're reaching out and being compassionate to other people, as Dr. Lee was saying, that's going to be good for our mental health as well.
That's such an excellent point. And I think that's a great note to end on, unless we have another question from reporters.
So I just want to add just a little comments about the differential impact of the COVID-19. And because really, if you look at the current data, in a lot of the most impacted population, they're all those are population are marginalized and also have very low economic income. Mm-hmm. And some of them that doesn't have, have limited access to childcare, right? Also, most of them, they are a large percentage of the essential workforce, and they're more likely to be immunocompromised, and also have struggle in terms of housing and food insecurity. And also some of them don't even have the physical capacity to practice social distancing. So and then also have no shelter. Some of people that doesn't have social shelter, and also low access to water and many other essential stuff. So we have. So this is very important. I'm so glad that Dr. Terrie that brought up this differential impact in terms of COVID-19. And I think what we can do, what we already mentioned, I think even just to the news reporter, and then all of us pay attention and recognize the differential impact, and then lending out, that's important. And that's also among our students as well, and people, yeah.
Thank you so much. So these have been great comments. I'm sorry we ran into some technical issues with Greg's connection, but we really appreciate the insight all of you have shared today. I'll just ask if any other reporters have an additional question. And if not, I think this is a great point to end on. Thank you again for taking part. As a reminder, we have videotaped today's session, and we'll be sending that out to those of you who RSVP'd. Please let us know if you'd like to follow up with any of these great guests. And we'll be having another briefing next Tuesday about the economic effect that COVID-19 is having on working families. So thank you again. Was someone trying to say something just then? If not, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.